Now here we're going to find applications for the proportions and solving of proportions that we did in section 5.3. Remember that a proportion is nothing but an equation that has a ratio on the left. So you have something over something, and these two sides are related, obviously. And these are the kinds of equations that we're going to set up and then solve for the unknown. So in any one of these problems, we have a numerator, a denominator, a numerator, and a denominator. One of these numbers is missing and we have to solve for it. That's what it all boils down to. But you have to read the question carefully and set up the equation correctly. So when you're reading the question, you have to think about the quantities that are being compared. Okay, so Didi takes her pulse for 10 seconds and counts 13 beats. So you can think of 10 seconds as time and this as the number of beats. Okay, so these are the two quantities that we are comparing. How many beats per minute is this? So we're trying to find out how many beats. So what is this number, which we're going to call x, per minute when the time is given as 1 minute? And remember, the time here is measured in seconds and here in minutes. So let's just make this consistent with the other measurement of time, which is in seconds. So 1 minute equals 60 seconds. So now that we've understood the question, we know that we're comparing two quantities: beats, number of beats, n, and the time that it takes for the number of beats. So I'm going to set up the equation like this. It could be, let's just write this down. Time over number of beats is equal to time over number of beats. So the two sides are ratios and they are proportional. So on the left, let's just set up the first sentence. 10 seconds, 13 beats. So there are 13 beats in 10 seconds. So I'm going to put 10 seconds in the numerator divided by the number of beats, which is 13. So the heart beats 13 times in 10 seconds. Now we're going to find out how many beats, so in 1 minute. So the number in the numerator is the time, so which is 60 seconds. Okay, I'm just going to put seconds here so that way we know. And then it says how many beats. We don't know how many beats, so we're going to call it x. So there you are. We've set up the equation. But remember, you have to be consistent. If you have time in the numerator on the left side, make sure you have time in the numerator on the right side as well. If you have number of beats in the denominator, make sure you have number of beats in the denominator on the right side as well. So they have to match, because we are talking about a proportionality, and these two have to match. If they don't match, then you get a completely wrong answer. So now that we know this is correct, so 10 seconds, 60 seconds, so that's consistent. That's time in the numerator on both sides. Number of beats, which is 13 on the left, and number of beats that we don't know, we're going to call it x on the right. Now, once you've set up the equation correctly, just double check before you proceed to solve the equation. So we solve by cross multiplication. So we're going to say 10x equals 60 times 13. That's what we get when we cross multiply. Now remember, we have to get x by itself. So we have to divide both sides. Since 10 is multiplied to x, we divide both sides with 10. Times 13 over 10. So the 10 cancels, and technically we've solved the equation. 60 times 13 over 10 is the number of beats in 60 seconds. So now we're just going to simplify. Technically you've solved it. Now if you're allowed to use a calculator, you're going to just enter these numbers into your calculator. 60 times 13 divided by 10, if you're allowed to use a calculator. But in this class, we're just going to do this by hand. It's going to be 6 times 10. Since I know there's a 10 in the denominator, I'm going to cancel the 10 in the denominator with the 10 in the numerator. Technically, I'm canceling those zeros, which is really canceling a 10. Now, x is equal to 6 times 3. So we're doing multiplication. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 ones are 6, 7. And what is this 78? Remember what it is? It's the number of beats. So basically what we're saying is, if the heart beats 13 times in 10 seconds, the heart will beat 78 times in 60 seconds. So in your mind, if this makes sense, then you know you are on the right track, except maybe you have to check your calculations again to make sure that you have not made any mistakes. Now, if you're at home, do the calculations by hand and check it using your calculator. So the next question, on a map, the distance between Nashville, Tennessee and Atlanta, Georgia is 3.5 inches. So remember, the map distance is 3.5 inches when the actual distance is 210 miles. So right away, the first sentence tells you that you're comparing two quantities, the map distance and the actual distance. So your equation is going to look like map distance over actual distance is equal to map distance over actual distance. So this is how we're going to set it up. So the first sentence tells us that if the map distance is 3.5 inches, then the actual distance is 210 miles. Remember, the map distance is in the numerator, the actual distance in the denominator. So let's read on. If the map distance between two cities, Little Rock and Dallas, is 4.75 inches, so we know it sits in the numerator on the other side, what is the actual distance? If you don't know what it is, we're going to call it x. So your answer is going to be x miles. So if 3.5 inches on the map represents 210 miles, we are going to find out how many miles 4.75 inches represents. So now I'm going to write it without the units, just so that we're working only with numbers at this point. And then at the end, we'll think about what our answer means. So we're going to keep this clean. 210 over x. So we cross multiply. And that gives us 3.5x equals 4.75 times 210. So this is equal to 3.5x equals 4.75 times 210. But x is multiplied to 3.5. The way we get rid of 3.5 and get x by itself, because we want to solve for x, we divide both sides by 3.5. We cancel common factors and we get x equals 4.75 times 210 divided by 3.5. Now, if you're allowed to use calculators, at this point, you're done. And I'm just going to write down what we're supposed to get as the answer. And that's equal to 285. We're going to check if this works out. We're going to do the calculations by hand. Now remember, there's one decimal place in the denominator and two decimal places in the numerator. And we're comfortable working with whole numbers. So I'm going to get rid of the decimal place values in both the numerator and the denominator. So in the numerator, I have to shift two decimal places. for which I have to multiply with 100. And I know that if I multiply the denominator with 100, the decimal places will be gone, because all I need is one decimal place to be gone. But in this case, whatever I do in the numerator, I have to do in the denominator. And only multiplying by 100 will get rid of the decimal places in the numerator and denominator. So we have 475 times 210 divided by, and now if I shift 2 decimal place values to the right, I get 350. So x is equal to, and then now we're going to think about what to cancel. And I guess we could cancel this. And because that's a 10 in the numerator and a 10 in the denominator. Now let's think about what else can be cancelled. 35 is 7 times 5. Remember that 7 goes 3 times into 21. So let's split this as 7 times 3 is 21. The denominator is easy. 7 times 5 is 35. I know 5 goes into 475. So let's figure out how many times. 5 9s are 45. Subtract to get a 2. Bring the 5 down. And 5 5s are 25. I subtract to get a 0. So it is 5 times 95. So I cancel the 7s, cancel the 5s. And my final answer is 95 times 3. 5 times 3 is 15. 9 3s are 27 plus 128. So x is equal to 285. Now let's think about what exactly this x means. So remember that if you look at this equation, you'll recall what we were trying to do. If the map distance is 3.5 inches, we were given that the actual distance is 210 miles. Using the same ratio, we can say that if the map distance is 4.75 inches, then the actual distance is 285 miles. And does it make sense in your head that 3.5 miles is 210 for 4.75, 3.5 inches, sorry, is 210 miles, and 4.75 inches should be a little larger. And that makes sense, but you can always go back and check your calculations, make sure it's correct.